Victoria, British Columbia. And you're going to give a talk about your product and your journey into, well, building this product and from idea to a product. So I leave the word to you. And well, if you want to keep, you just mention how you want to take questions and such. You'll decide best yourself. So with those words, very, very much. Well, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we appreciate it, Frederick. And yeah, it's really great to see you again. And we're really excited to chat about Barnacle and the creation of Barnacle. So I am Brandon Wright, founder and CEO of Barnacle.
I'm Darren Beckwith, Director of Engineering.
And yeah, so Barnacle is a security and monitoring device for boats. So we'll go through the process of how Barnacle was created, give some use cases of the product. And then at the very end, we have what we call the museum, which has some of the iterations of the actual circuit boards that we can show everyone as well. So first off, Barnacle Systems, incorporated in July of 2017, and we are headquartered in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And our office, which we're in right now, amongst COVID, we obviously have our COVID restrictions, but things have just opened up here in British Columbia. So hence being able to sit a little bit closer. And we're on a floating office. So we're literally on a barge in a marina in an office. So we have a fairly unique startup. Instead of starting in a garage, we figured that we'd start in a boat. We had to stay on brand. And so with our product, kind of fun, we were the first ever marine electronics product to exhibit at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas a couple of years ago. And we did a repeat show last year at CES as well. We've won a few awards, which has been kind of neat. Most innovative for Pacific Yachting, Small Business BC, Best Concept. We were the Startup of the Year for our local accelerator. And then we made the cover of Douglas Magazine, which is a local business magazine. And our mission is to reinvent how people check on their boat. So we've actually found a little bit of success in RVs as well, without really marketing to that space. So our mission over time may be evolving because we've found that not only do people want to monitor the boats, but they also want to monitor their RVs. So a little bit about myself. I have a fairly unique background. I'm an electrical engineer. I got into electrical engineering because I got tired of developing software as a kid. I started making websites when I was about 12 years old and had a small web design company and thought that getting into electronics would get me away from software, which proved to be very not true. But my background is primarily in integrated systems. And so I previously, at a company called FLIR, developed military security and monitoring systems. So systems that would protect the borders of countries, military bases, and royal palaces. And so the photo up at the top there is me presenting to the retired US Secretary of Defense, which was very nerve-wracking, but a very cool experience. And once my job got a little bit too intense developing these systems, primarily in the Middle East, I left that job and then developed IoT systems for smart cities. And so the two smart cities products that I developed as a product manager there one was a radar level sensor, which you can see that's mounted onto a wooden post on there. And that would detect water levels automatically as they rise and alert headquarters in a city to alert someone if there's flooding. So this was particularly useful in the United States for areas prone to flooding, like in Arizona or New Orleans or areas like that. And then the second product was a remote camera system for forest firefighters so they could automatically monitor forest fires, deploy it by helicopter, and then be able to check on these fires remotely without having to be in the way or in any danger. And then, of course, my boat in January of 2017 broke moorage, which means that it floated to shore and never told me. And so it was really embarrassing for me because my whole career had been developing smart sensors that were used for protecting assets. And I couldn't even protect my own assets. So I saw a gap in the market and figured I'd pursue it. And that's brought us to here today.
My background's a little bit different than Brandon's. at a young age, I really enjoyed taking things apart and figuring out how they work. And that's kind of what led me to engineering, but less on the electronics side. My background for pretty much all of my career has been in embedded systems, mostly on the firmware side. So writing the software that you actually use to run the hardware products. So most of my career I spent at a local company in Victoria called Carmanah Technologies. Carmanah was a well-known company for building solar-powered aids to navigation, and then they took that platform and branched out into outdoor lighting, so parks, pathways, and area lighting, IoT devices like the one you see in the center, which we made for Globalstar, which is a satellite asset management device. But all of the products that Carmanah made had to run on solar power. So they had to be self-contained, completely sealed, have at least a 5-year runtime if possible, and had to have very, very little in the way of operating current. Most of the power should go to the load, which was pretty much light. So the lantern that you see at the top would be used to mark waterways, shipping channels. We had lanterns that could be seen from half a nautical mile away all the way up to several nautical miles away, 5, 6, 7, depending on the color. That one at the top, that lantern is particularly interesting because one of the first lanterns to use Bluetooth to be able to connect, diagnose, and basically remove any kind of user interface from the product and put that user interface onto your phone. It was also one of the first lanterns to use a lithium-ion battery in a saltwater environment. The center product was Carmanah's only foray into doing design for another company. So Carmanah didn't sell that product. We designed and built it for another company, Globalstar, as I mentioned. So that product is quite unique because it's one of the only intrinsically safe. So it means that it can be inside in this case, a fuel tanker or in a refinery or anywhere there could be a gaseous environment that could be ignited. That product is deemed safe to go into that environment and be used to track assets. And then the product on the bottom is one of Carmanah's traffic products, and it increases driver stopping compliance to 90%. So it's a very unique pattern that gets driver attention, has been proven to allow pedestrians to safely cross the road.
All right. Yeah, so there's quite a few different applications for IoT, of course, and Darren and I have certainly seen the gamut of it in our careers, and we are fairly young, so we expect to see a lot more really interesting IoT solutions in the future. So jumping into our product, like I mentioned, it's called Barnacle. It's hardware that you place on board a boat, and here's an example of it on a military-style boat. Our product's been deployed on recreational, industrial, and military boats now, which has been really interesting growth. It monitors batteries, bilge pumps, shore power connections, GPS for tracking, has a camera for security. And some of the use cases, just giving more real life scenarios, which is always interesting with IoT because there's a lot of pie in the sky ideas and it's cool to see how they actually apply in the real world. So one of our big saves with the Barnacle happened very early on. And this was, we call it My Boat Almost Sank. And so this boat owner installed a Barnacle on their boat and they live 4 hours away from their boat. The boat owner received some notifications from the app saying that their bilge pump was running very frequently. And so for those of you that might not know what a bilge pump is, that's the pump that pumps water off your boat. So if your bilge pump's running frequently, that means that you're taking on water. And so as you can see from this image, from the screenshot, the bilge pump was running both frequently, so running very often, but it also ran for long durations. So this means that it was taking on some serious water. And the boat owner called the marina since they were 4 hours away and said, hey, you guys got to check on my boat. The marina attendants went down to the boat and said, yep, your boat's taken on water. And they managed to patch up the boat. And it turned out that a tarp had collapsed and was pouring water down the mast and filling up their 48-foot Beneteau yacht class sailboat. So a $250,000 sailboat that was saved by the barnacle. Next is the unexpected guest. So this was actually a story of myself, and I received a notification on my smartwatch, so on my Apple Watch, while I was out shopping with my wife and daughter, saying that my hatch had been opened and that motion was detected. So I went onto the app, and sure enough, on the graph, I could see that the hatch had been opened. We have an accelerometer on the product, so a gyroscope accelerometer, so you can actually tell the movement of the boat in a storm, or if there's any waves that are knocking it around, or on a smaller sailboat or powerboat, when someone gets on board, you can actually see when the boat heels over. So I could see that my boat had heeled for a brief time at the exact same time that the hatch door was open. And then a photo was taken capturing someone on board, and it turned out to just be my dad. So it wasn't a big threat, but it was still nice peace of mind, because my boat is currently at anchor still on a mooring ball. And there are some interesting individuals that are moored around the boat. So having that peace of mind and having a security system on board is very important for me. But we did actually catch our first real burglar on a boat. It was on a catamaran in France. And so someone broke into the boat. The boat owner received a notification and sent the photograph of the individual to the police. And the police right away, even though the photo, this is a zoomed in and cropped image, at night, a little bit blurry with the infrared camera, right away the police knew exactly who it was. That's because most crimes happen with repeat offenders where the police would likely already know them. So by just being able to identify and see that image, they could confirm, yes, this person needs to be apprehended, and they were able to do so. So the actual journey of developing an IoT product is very thrilling, very stressful, but this is the very humble beginnings. So as most people would start, we used an Arduino. And what you'll learn with IoT and with product management in general is you want to develop a product that solves a problem. And so I had a problem that needed to be solved for my 27-foot Catalina sailboat. And so I built up this Arduino, programmed it myself, bought some off-the-shelf parts from just online sources, cellular based. But with the Arduino, I found it was fairly unreliable in the marine environment, and the product overall was just hobby grade. So this was me just trying to solve my own problem. So I thought, well, the logical next step is to go to Linux. So this is all pre-Darren, of course. But I developed a solution that was using the Raspberry Pi. And the reason I switched to a Raspberry Pi is because it had a camera. But what we found right away was that it was very power hungry. And so for my 27-foot sailboat, I have a house battery and a starter battery and no solar panel at the time. So if I had a power hungry device on board, it would actually do more damage on my boat than good, because over time it's just going to kill my house battery. And also with the Raspberry Pi, we found that it just wasn't suitable for production. So being able to replicate a product using Raspberry Pi is maybe not the right call, packaging it up and all that. But for some, we've seen Raspberry Pis in the field and people selling products that are Raspberry Pi based, which is perfectly fine. But for us, we wanted something that we could have more control over. And so thought, well, do we just stick with the Raspberry Pi for now? And no. Thought, keep calm and Google it. So we wanted to find a solution that was less power hungry and something that solved our problem of wanting to make our own circuit boards. So we found a product provided by Sierra Wireless called the Mango Red. They have a whole series of IoT chips. And so they provide a cell plan, they provide the board, they provide, the integrated circuit and the CPU, and they provide a dev kit. So I thought that was perfect. They have great documentation, the circuit board was open source, and they had a technical community where you could ask questions. And so in IoT, there's certainly large communities of people where they all want to help each other with their projects. So I highly encourage you, if you are looking at developing your own IoT product, certainly join those communities and engage in the chatter. But what you'll see here is with that development board, that whiteboard that's on top, that was the custom circuit board that we developed in order to test that we could add all the sensors that we wanted and it would interface properly to that Linux-based computer. And so by doing that, that verified and it reduced a lot of our risk by saying, hey, we can use this type of temperature humidity. We can use these types of relays. We can test all the functionality of the chip itself. And that really validated and reduced the risk of going to the next step, which was actually developing our own custom boards. So now we've gone through quite a few iterations. So on this picture, we have Rev 5 of the IO board and Rev 10 of the RF board. In the past year and a half, I guess, I can't even keep track of time, but we're at Rev 21 of the RF board and Rev 10 of the IO board, which is what we use, which is what's deployed on all boats in the field now. But it kind of goes to show that when we're developing these circuit boards, there's a lot of iterations that we went through. And what was really key is it wasn't always issues, for example, like obviously we run into stumbling blocks as we'll show you with our museum, but it's a lot of customer feedback. And so as you're developing an IoT product, you don't want to build something that just solves your problem. You're trying to solve the problem of all your potential customers. And so what you're going to do is you're going to identify different buyer personas, as they say, and if you're ever going to get your MBA or in marketing, is you're going to figure out who your ideal customers are and you want to solve their problems. So as we were developing the product, every iteration solved a different problem. And if we found that we had some parts of the product that weren't solving anyone's problem, we'd actually remove that to help save costs. So some of the big pain points, this is probably where Darren should take over here, is talking about certifications and everything with the IoT products.
Sure. So as Brandon was saying, certifications for IoT is particularly important because for the most part, you're normally dealing with some kind of wireless component, whether that be short-range wireless like Bluetooth or Zigbee or Z-Wave, or long-range wireless like Cellular, Sigfox, LoRa. All of those products have and require different certifications depending on where you are going to deploy and target your products. So for any IoT product, one of the easiest ways to deal with certifications is first look for a module. So a module is a part of a circuit that a vendor has designed and built that already has normally the radio certifications and the testing behind it. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to integrate their hard work and their monetary gain to make that device and put that on your circuit board, and then you can leverage their certifications. You still have to do some repeat testing of the circuit board depending on which country you're in. So that would be CE for Europe, or it would be FCC and ISED for North America. The other important point with certifications is knowing your frequency spectrum, what frequencies are allowed in those countries you're targeting. So if you're building an IoT device for North America and you don't plan for it to leave those borders, then you can only target FCC and ISED, and you could use 900 megahertz. But if you want a product that can be ubiquitous, go around the world, be used in North America, and Europe, then you need to make sure that you're not using something like 900 megahertz for any kind of sub-gigahertz communication, because while 900 megahertz is available in North America, it's not available in Europe. You have to switch to 868, and then there's different power rules. So certifications is something that you need to be very mindful of when you're building IoT products. Like I said, a great way to start is to use modules. The other part of the certifications is power. Certain countries don't allow you to transmit at the same output level, so you have to be mindful of that. So the best way to check on the certifications is look at the data sheets. When you're looking for a particular module, look to see what certifications it has. They're very clearly stated on there. FCC for the United States, ISED or IEC, which used to be Industry Canada. For Canada, they pretty much go hand in hand. It's very uncommon to see a product design that has only FCC in North America, because you wouldn't just sell it just in the United States. And then CE for Europe. But then other regions also have their own local certifications. So Australia and New Zealand used to have CTIC and ATIC. They now have RCM. Japan has its own certification. So there are a bunch of rules that have to be followed. And if you don't follow them and you do market your product broadly and it does get adopted, you can be fined. So that is a concern. And then other technologies like Bluetooth and Thread, they also have licensing bodies or groups that are responsible for managing those standards. So there's also fees that are paid, that have to be paid to those companies. And to give you an example of the cost savings of using a module, so Carmanah had capital in order to invest in actual certifications. And so we would be looking at anywhere from $30,000 US to certify a product without a module versus somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 to certify a product with a module. So it is a very capital intense process, and that would be to certify a product that went both in North America and in Europe. And then, like I said, compatibility in other countries, just knowing where you want to deploy your target.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, with the certifications as well, there's all sorts of classes of it. So being able to deploy it in a home versus on a boat versus on a car, there's all sorts of different ones. And there's some that are way more relaxed than others.
Yep.
And if you don't think you're going to get audited, we've been audited once for our certifications. And that was very shocking when we got it. It's like, we're so young and we're so fragile, like what's going on? And we'd worked with a certification body that actually confirmed everything for us. We had all the paperwork just in case this ever happened. So we received the email, and I think it was within 5 minutes, I actually responded with the package. And I got an email back and a phone call being like, we've never seen a response this fast ever. Like, and they were like, yeah, you've got all the right paperwork and you probably won't ever hear from us again. Like, perfect. So always be prepared for worst case scenario. So if you do throw a certification on there, at least have your paperwork to back it up. CE is self-certifying, but if you ever do get audited, you're expected to have all the paperwork. So
if you're found offending, you can be in a lot of hot water.
Yeah.
Your devices can't interfere with other devices. They need to be able to accept harmful interference.
Yeah.
One other pain point, I don't know if you put on there, I would say it's current, because you touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
So a lot of IoT products are pretty much primarily battery powered, right? Obviously, if you're building products that move, they're going to run on batteries of some kind. So another pain point is, and Brandon touched on this earlier, is how do you design a product that can last on batteries? So that's depending on the wireless technology you use, the frequencies that you're using, that's really understanding the hardware design, being able to turn different functions and parts of your hardware design off to really control the power. And then also knowing your end application. Our product is battery powered in that we're using the boat's main battery bank, but those batteries are quite large. So we can afford to have a higher current than some of those products that I showed, Brandon showed earlier from Carmanah, that had very small batteries and had to have microamps of operating current. So that's why in prototyping, you don't normally focus on the current necessarily, but it should be something that's very mindful.
All right. Oh, and security. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a very, very big concern in, I would say, any IoT endeavor nowadays. So for a variety of reasons, a lot of governments around the world are starting to enact rules surrounding how IoT products need to be secured. It should be something that is designed from the outset into your IoT product. If you don't have a good understanding of security, you may be opened up. You're opening your device up to being used in nefarious activities. So a good example of this is a few years ago, a group of hackers managed to get control of a lot of webcams and set-top boxes across the world. And they, instead of attacking one website, they chose to turn that whole botnet onto DIN, which is a DNS. It's one of the, basically the phone directory of the internet. And they used all of that horsepower to take down basically most of the United States eastern seaboard. And so what happened, every time your computer would go and look up like google.com, it needs to find that address. Well, it couldn't find that address because that server couldn't communicate with. And that attack was felt across the world. It took down part of Europe and it took down part of the West Coast of North America as well. So security is very, very important. And in some cases, California has enacted a rule that you can't have default passwords. They have to have, if there are default passwords, then the first time the product is powered on, it has to be challenged and the user has to set new passwords before they can proceed. A lot of these rules will continue, I think, to be enacted by governments because there is a proliferation of IoT devices.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, so that's the presentation, and I'll jump to showing the museum. We call it the museum because, well, there's a few dinosaurs in there, but as you saw in the original, some fossils. But as you saw from the original photos, here's the original barnacle. So this has just the Arduino underneath. When I developed the circuit boards, I used a service online called PCBWay to develop the custom circuit board underneath, but I had to develop things so quickly that I didn't even have time to do it properly, I guess. So I had to hand solder a bunch of stuff as well. But yeah, that was the first iteration, and a lot of stress with that. But at that point, I'd already quit my job. The company itself has never had an investor. We're still bootstrapped and we're surviving off of actual cash flow from customers. So whether that's inspiring or stressful for you to hear, that's how we've survived so far. Again, this is that board, the Mango Red. And what was funny was we had this board developed here, this IoT board that slid into this slot. And we thought that this thickness of the board was going to be appropriate for that slot, but it turned out to be a little bit too thin. So I actually had to 3D print different sizes of washers to wedge it in just so it could make contact on both sides. So it's just some of the things that you may run into as you're developing an IoT solution, but I highly recommend working with a development kit first so you can reduce as many variables as possible. So that's not even having your custom board on top, just all the interface directly to the peripherals that you want to design with, and then add in your custom board on top and test those parts. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say when you're done, there's a couple of questions.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And then this is where Darren came in. So after we done the first couple of runs here, you can see that it didn't go well the very first time. So this is pre-Darren. This isn't Darren's fault. This is my fault. But what you'll learn is that before you go through a second round of production, you want to verify every single component. So when we did our first run, we had 42 problems essentially that we'd identified. And this is before we deployed on any customer boats or anything like that, of course. But we went and tested out every single possible part on there. And you can see there's even more testing that happened under there. But that way, we went through the schematic, we went through every single component and just made sure it was good. And the next production run after this iteration here had zero rework. So we were meticulous in actually going through these iterations, because being bootstrapped and not having outside investors, we couldn't go and spend $5,000 or $10,000 at a time to go test things.
Yeah, so one thing I don't think we touched on was one of the single most expensive things when you're developing IoT products. It is really the hardware capital involved in actually getting the hardware built. Yeah. So as Brandon said, you start with a prototype board. That's a great way to do it. It reduces your cost. You have a known design that functions well, and then you can add on to those prototype boards with hats or shields, depending on what type of prototype board you're using, or in this case, IoT cards. But the reason why hardware is so expensive is you're normally doing very small volumes at the beginning. So you have an unknown design, and no matter how many times you design review it, there could be an interaction, especially in power supplies. If you're using switching power supplies, there's going to be emissions in those power supplies, and sometimes you don't get it right, no matter how good your intentions are.
Yeah.
So you have, and when you're doing those small runs, the component cost is quite expensive. So is the board cost. So, it really takes a lot of capital to build hardware products. And that is also, it also takes capital and time, because in software, it's very iterative. You can sit there and press compile or deploy thousands of times a day, it seems like. But in hardware, there is a lead time in order to get the product built. Yeah. And that lead time is both in the manufacturing of the circuit board, but now it's also has been a big challenge with the component supply chain. Getting components has been and is a challenge. And a lot of that is due to the automotive industry and our cell phones. Those two industries take a large number of the small passives that pretty much every circuit needs, like resistors, especially capacitors lately. So it's something to keep in mind. If you can stay in the prototyping stage longer, you will use less capital, and until you're ready and you have that design, and then review, do as many reviews as you can to be confident in your design before you go and spend the money. Because production runs, it could be, depending on the cost or size and complexity and parts on your board, you could be looking at 5, 10, 20K, and that may only get you 5 or 10 boards. So it seems like a large amount of money, but you want to use it wisely. So we had a couple of...
I think you have a couple of questions also in the chat window, but just a quick one. How many, if you want to start your own production of you have your prototype ready, and how many devices are we talking about before you're like, it's any idea of starting to produce something?
Yeah, I mean, for the very early ones, I think I made, say, 5 of these guys with the Arduino. I think I did 25 of these ones here. And that way, if some of them had to be thrown away or as I was doing rework, but recycled. Yes. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah. And then with these runs, these were much more expensive because we actually developed 2 circuit boards. We have our RF board, which has all our communications, and then an IO board that has all of our inputs and outputs. But I think my first run before Darren was around was about 20. And then after that, we're doing runs of 100 and 150 now.
Yeah, that's so that's what I would call small to medium volume production. Normally for prototyping, you're doing 5 to 10.
Yeah.
And the reason why you do those numbers, it really depends on what you're going to need to do with those circuit boards. So for certification bodies, they normally need finalized product in order to grant your certifications. So when I was at Carmana, we would have a run of 10, and several of those boards, 2 or 3 or 4, could be dedicated only to certification. So they wouldn't be used other than to verify that they work. You're also allowed a small amount of rework on the boards. The other reason why hardware is costly, if you vastly change this board after you have certification, your certification doesn't apply anymore. So now you have to go back and pay again to get them to test it. So every time you make changes, and it really depends on the change, and as an engineer, you have to decide, is that change material, and could it affect the emissions or any of the radio aspects of the device? And if the answer is yes, then technically you need to go back and have it recertified. Yeah. So that's another reason why hardware design is costly. Every revision may need another certification. That could mean another $30,000.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can jump into some of these questions here.
So the first question here was, do you have any more advice for fellow engineers on how to make it in the business?
Yeah. So the best advice I can provide for any engineer looking to build a business is listen to your customers, listen to the market. I went through a very expensive product management school that was paid for by a previous company. And at the end of it, all we learned was just listen to what the customers are asking for. So I produced a lot of surveys. I surveyed the market. I sent them out via Facebook. I took out Facebook ads that literally just pointed at a boating survey to see what people's pain points were. And then in terms of actually starting the business, you can, of course, bootstrap like we did, where that's literally spending as little money as possible to get the first iteration of the product out, deploy it to customers, get their feedback, and then do the next iteration, and just being very cost sensitive and finding ways to really hit that pain point that those customers have so that they start buying quickly. Then the other way is, of course, through angel investment or venture capital. So that is getting an outside investor to invest in the company. With that route, you can lose some control of your path. So for us, we can still pivot really quickly. Like we can say, today we're going after recreational boaters, and tomorrow we might be going after military. Whereas once you have investment, sometimes you've got to stay on one course, and but you have more money to experiment with as well. So you can put more money into education of the product. Building a market is very expensive. So for us, teaching people that we exist is very expensive. And that's where having investment can be very, very helpful. For doing certifications and doing quick turns of circuit boards, having investments very beneficial there. But yeah, those are, do you have any?
Yeah, well, I'm surprised. So one thing I learned when I joined Barnacle and traveling with Brandon is podcasts are key, especially in business. There's a lot of good business podcasts that can help you navigate this. One thing that I found before when I was at Carmana and just in engineering school in general here in Canada was there was no real business courses that we took in engineering. So having a good understanding of, at least some finance, like how does a business run? What are, income statements, and reading other companies' public filing documents can give you a good understanding of how businesses operate. But I think you hit the nail on the head early. It's really understanding your market and taking your engineering brain and you need to remove the problem solving aspect and listen to what the customers want. It's not necessarily about what's the cool technology to build. It's literally like how, what causes them a problem and how can you solve it? And maybe that is literally the simplest, cheapest thing possible. But if nobody else is thinking that, then it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't have to be an expensive, cool widget to solve a problem.
And then is it possible to monitor several boats, for example, boat rentals? Well, Stefan or Stefan, yes. Absolutely, you can monitor multiple boats.
You should show me how many's on your phone right
now. Well, so we have the Harbor Patrol here locally. So those are basically our harbor police. They use Barnacle to monitor the position of all their boats. We're getting into oil spill response boats, boat rentals as well, of course. It's endless, but yeah, so here's a list of a few boats that we're monitoring right now, just on my phone. Not a very good view, but anyways, yes, the answer is yes. And so Stefan, if you do have multiple boats, I'd love to talk to you.
Do we hire IoT pen testers to test the security of our devices?
Well, so very early on, I didn't have an office. I literally worked out of the startup accelerator. And one of the individuals that was also working out of there was a cybersecurity person that was doing audits. And that was the business that he was building. And without me knowing, he went and did a full-on attack to see how the system behaved. And it was actually pretty remarkable. I don't know if I've ever told you this whole story. But yeah, he did an attack, and the server that we're using, we partnered with Google. So we have the Google Cloud Platform. It identified the attack and it blocked that person's IP immediately. So there's a lot of technology that's available that's out there through Amazon or Google or Microsoft or whatever that has a lot of the security already built in. And then there's the encryption of data over cellular. So with our system, the data is encrypted in transit and at rest through some of the existing providers that we have, which is, it's great. You can leverage all that. But since that attack, we haven't done any official third-party outsourcing. We did use some university students to write some reports for us, which was great. So doing an audit and then providing some, identifying some things that you could do a bit better. But overall, we haven't spent the money on that yet. We've been leveraging a lot of what already exists through our platforms that provides ISO certifications, for example.
And then for the device side, we also leverage the manufacturer's secure firmware updates.
Hold on. I like the question. Are you afraid of being run over by some cheap Chinese competing products? Are ones soon to be on the market? Oh man, competition is just lovely. So what we've learned, and I mean, I've been in the IoT space now for almost 15 years, essentially, and going cheap does not work in most industries. And so some of the big players, the really big behemoths in the boating world, they've come out with products that were just white labels of the cheap Chinese stuff, and they just fail catastrophically in the field. And it's actually harmed all businesses in IoT, because when you release these inexpensive products that are unreliable, it really tarnishes that overall confidence in the IoT space. So someone that's buying a product, they may outright buy it and be like, I don't know if this is going to work, because most things don't work. And so having some of the big competitors and some of the big players in the market come out with these inexpensive products, which we've received some in-house to test, it's troubling. So yes, there are Chinese competitive, like Chinese white label products. There's some that are even just built locally, where they cut a lot of corners, and that has really harmed a lot of the IoT space. So, I mean, obviously we're concerned about it, that someone could come and run us over, but so far, instead of having the big players come out with these white label products and be successful, they've come out with the white label products and then in the end, invited us to their headquarters to talk about how we've been able to do it well, because our failure rate in the field is practically zero. We've developed our product iteratively. We do it all in-house. We do all our software development in-house, our electrical design in-house, and that allows us to be very, very confident with our product, where when you white label something or you contract everything out, sometimes you don't know what you're getting. So overall, obviously we're concerned about it, but at the end of the day, we're very confident in our product and that it's going to pull through. One of the strategies we've taken to help build the confidence in our product, as opposed to just buying something white labeled, is we've gone after those military boats that require that heightened certification. We've gone after industrial boats that people rely upon. So we go with trusted names and trusted organizations that can validate that our product works. And
or we just have requirements for domestic content, right?
Yeah, things like that. So for us, since we own all of our own IP, it allows us to control all that. So, I mean, yes, obviously cheap products, some people are okay with that, and they expect them to only last a year or 6 months. But for us, we expect our product to last many years on board a boat, which I believe brings us right into what is the usual lifetime for technology until it needs to be redesigned.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that really depends on the technology aspects. So I'd say, so because Barnacle is cellular based, the cellular normally has a sunset cycle. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but most of the carriers will provide their technology like 2G, 3G, LTE. They provide that technology for a period of time until there's newer technologies that have surpassed it. And then they need to reclaim that spectrum, that wireless bandwidth, because it costs them so much that they can't leave it sitting idle. So we are coming up, at least in North America, on a 3G sunset. So several of the major United States carriers, and then Canada will follow suit, will be slowly tearing down or taking down their 3G technology in order to repurpose that spectrum for something else. So that can force a design refresh. It can be a component problem. If you design in, as I said, supply chains are really volatile right now, depending on the products and what you're looking for. If you've designed in a component and that component goes EOL, or end of life, we call it, then you have a big problem. Now you have to go back and redesign your circuit board. You have no choice. So normally what happens in that situation is you try to buy up as much of the available stock as you can, and you hold on to it so that you can continue to produce your circuit boards. Other reasons why you may want to redesign the product could just be new technologies. Your product has been in the market for a couple of years. You have some new requirements that have come out that you can't fulfill with the current hardware, and you need to refresh that. And it's that iterative design. I would say in this space, not being Apple, Google, where you have the capital in order just to bring out a new widget every like 6 months, you tend to design these products to have a 5-year lifetime if possible or more, and that could depend on the batteries if you have battery technology in them. So a number of factors go into how long that life is. But when I design a product, I've always tried to design them to have a maximum service life, as long as possible for that particular product in that particular industry.
So one of them that we missed, which wireless technologies have you evaluated? Very early on, I want to mention that we had Wi-Fi on our device, and man, it was a nightmare. It's not that the Wi-Fi was tough for the device. It was that on people's boats, they expect to be able to connect to the marina Wi-Fi. And that was a real pain, because there'll be a splash screen where you have to agree to terms, or someone will host their own Wi-Fi on their boat. And most of the problems that we had was being kicked off of a network, whether it's a marina or whatever. So the customer requirement was that we're a security device that has to work all the time. And so by having Wi-Fi for us didn't make any sense. So we went full cellular right away, no Wi-Fi, because we wanted our product to be reliable and know that 24/7, it will send you an alert if something goes wrong on your boat. In terms of the wireless sensor piece, I guess, Darren, you can take that one.
Yeah, so we're currently have another product that we're going to be releasing very shortly. It is using Bluetooth and Zigbee. So it uses Zigbee for the wireless sensor aspect, and it uses Bluetooth as a way to join. So you have an out-of-band process for joining the sensors to the network, as well as controlling that process and getting more instantaneous feedback than we have with cellular. We've also looked at LoRa and Sigfox. Sigfox is not as prevalent in North America. It just didn't make a lot of sense here in North America for a variety of reasons, mostly to deal with the downlink bandwidth in the radio. We've also looked at LoRa. The problem with LoRa is that there was no real network in North America. It is still slowly being built out, and it does have benefits for a lot of applications, but where our products are going to be going offshore on a boat, we can still get cell service about 50 kilometers or more offshore. Mm-hmm. So we needed a technology that was something either cellular or satellite that we could use. We're also going to be adding satellite to our products so that we can go further offshore than we can currently.
So does new boat on the market come with the sensors and security off the shelf? Surprisingly, no. That's where we're very excited. We're quite a ways down the road of some really exciting, they're called OEM, original equipment manufacturer agreements, where our product will be installed on boats directly out of the factory. Some boat brands are doing this already with competing products, but that's where we've been invited to their facilities because they've had issues with the products that they're installing. So it's still really early times in the boat IoT market. Some of the huge boat brands that we've been chatting with, they know that this market exists. They say it's very exciting, but everyone expects to have a home security system or a car alarm. Go to a marina and odds are you can jump on a boat and find a key somewhere on board. Not that I'm encouraging you to steal a boat, but
disclaimer.
It'll be it's very surprising. If you have your own boat or friends or family, I bet you there's a key on board somewhere. It's crazy how old school the boating industry is.
So there's a question here about 5G hype. I mean, some of 5G, yes, I think there is a lot of hype. I think the biggest problem with 5G is it encompasses a lot of technologies in one kind of term. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to be a while before we're all walking around with like these uber fast phones, and we have cell towers literally everywhere because we're using the millimeter wave 5G. But it's like everything. It's an evolution. The carriers they want people to upgrade. They're investing in infrastructure. Our need for information and being able to communicate is becoming more and more a necessity, it seems, especially in what's going on right now. So having faster access to that is definitely a plus. It really depends on your product. Does our product need 5G right now? No, it doesn't. We don't use 5G. If you're building a very small battery powered device that's going to be tracking vehicles or livestock, as I've seen done in some of the Scandinavian countries, you could use something like LTE-M, which is a category of LTE, which is 5G compatible, but is much lower power, or NB-IoT for areas around Europe. Yeah. So you need to choose the technology, but yeah, I think there is a lot of pieces that a lot of people don't understand about 5G. Yeah. How is your workflow for software updates look, and how frequent? So that's a great question. Mm-hmm. So one thing we haven't touched on a lot is our cloud. So we have an entirely serverless cloud, which means we're not actually hosting any servers at Google, which is our cloud provider. We use serverless infrastructure. So in response to events, Google runs our code for us. And this is a very, very economical way to run a product platform like ours. So every time the device sends data, Google runs our code, whatever that particular function needs to be, and they bill us in 100 millisecond increments. And when the devices aren't sending any data, we're not actually being billed for idle time. So it's a really great feature. So we're constantly deploying code to that. So we do at least one, I would say, back-end function update, probably once every 2 weeks, depending on the features we're releasing. We have two clouds, actually. We have a staging cloud and our production cloud. So everything goes to staging first, then we move it to production. We probably do an app update once a month, depending on the features we've collected. Mm-hmm. We are constantly iterating on firmware, but we're pretty mindful of when we do those updates. So they do take a while to download to the device because we do have to send them over the cellular network. They can be quite large, and they also stop the security functionality of the product while that update is being installed. So we do those once a quarter if there are really key features or bug fixes that need to be added to the product. But when I got here, I think we had done one last year. We did one major one last year, and we'll probably roll another one out towards the end, this month, to support our new product. So, the software and the software side in the cloud and the app, we can iterate on quite quickly. I'd say firmware takes a little bit more time to iterate and test because there's a lot more interactions on the particular product.
Yeah, so do you plan on expanding your devices for a fully integrated smart boat control lighting? Man, you just know exactly, our roadmap. But yeah, of course, that's seeing the smart home. If you look on Instagram or social media, we have the hashtag smart boats. So we're very much pushing towards that. Our new product, the Barnacle Mate, which is an add-on accessory to the Barnacle. It supports an EMEA 2000, which is a communication bus on board a boat. So that's like having an Ethernet network, but still legacy. It's still CAN bus on board of a vessel. So our product right now does have relay outputs. So you can control lights, you can control heaters, you can control sirens, you can control things like that. But on the EMEA 2000, that means that you can actually communicate with all the onboard devices. So you can set a preset that says, I'm on board, so set the lights to a certain level. And once you're at anchor, it can automatically turn on your anchor light and things like that. So the answer is yes. For us, we do have a very strong focus on security. So creating a very secure environment on your boat, if you're leaving it in the Caribbean, for example, or if you're going through some areas that you're not feeling particularly comfortable, even while you're on board, we have a very strong focus on security, and that really just leverages my background of protecting royal families and Air Force bases. So it's definitely a unique channel that we are specifically focusing on.
What is your take on standards like sensor interoperability, plug and play? Are you using some standard sensors or rely on your own line of products? That's a great question. So the original Barnacle doesn't have any wireless sensors on it. All of the sensors that are on board have to be physically connected or are part of the circuit board. But for the wireless standards, yeah. So we decided to use Zigbee on the Mate, as we've talked about. And the main reason for that is there is a whole host of products that we can connect to that we don't have to spend the capital to design. So they have products like light bulbs, which a lot of people are familiar with. IKEA makes a lot of Zigbee-based products. They also make wireless security sensors. So we instantly had access to a variety of wireless security sensors by going to these standard protocols. As for the plug and play aspect, I think it's important to note right now, if you're in this space or you're looking at it, the main players, Google, Amazon, and Apple, are all getting together along with the Zigbee Alliance and others to create a more connected home. They actually call it CHIP, Connected Home over IP. And that is because people expect this stuff to work. Doesn't matter who made it. They buy a light bulb from company A, they buy a hub from company B, they just want it to work. And the standards right now don't really make that interoperability. They don't meet that customer need of, I just want it to work. So they're actually in the middle of designing a completely new standard, more for your home right now. But it sounds like, from what I've read, that it'll be able to be used on over wireless protocols like Bluetooth or Zigbee, which would mean that we may be able to leverage it in the future. So that may bring in a whole host of other devices that we can use. So you have there are always going to be some sensors that you're going to wire to your circuit board. A good example of that is our temperature, pressure, humidity sensor is on board the product. You could make a remote one if you wanted, but then you have to go and connect that to a wireless sensor. So it's not just a wireless module. So it's not just the sensor. Now you've made a whole new product if one doesn't exist. So yeah, plug and play is important for sure.
Yeah, and making your own sensors, you have to go through the certification.
And security. It's just
yeah. So if you're doing it yourself, you got to go through the whole certification process all over again, even if it's for a little tiny temperature probe. So it certainly adds cost by having your own. But at the end of the day, if you do make your own, your costs in the long run are much lower. So if you're partnering with, like for us, we partnered with Samsung right out of the gate. So in our background, you can kind of see we got some Samsung sensors. That was our first partnership. We are going to be partnering with some of the other big smart home brands so that we can be that smart home for your boat. Because it just makes sense to have $20 sensors that you can just throw on your boat, just like you would on your home. A lot of our competition have $200 sensors that do the exact same thing. For us, it just didn't make sense to develop all our own sensors when some of the big powerhouses have just done such a good job of building something that can be mass produced, and we don't have to worry about supply chain issues.
That and some of our competitor sensors can't be, they can't leave North America. They can't come to North America because they chose the wrong wireless frequency spectrum. So by choosing Zigbee, we have we're using 2.4 gigahertz. Now, granted, it doesn't go as far as 900 megahertz or 868, but most boats that we're targeting aren't that large.
They're not a kilometer long.
Exactly. And we don't need that technology. It was more important for our product to be able to go to from North America literally to Europe and without any issues or anybody complaining about any kind of frequency issues.
So Peter says, I see you have an annual service plan. Which things are you doing then? So the annual service plan is for the cellular subscription. So someone's got to pay for the cellular. It's just like registering for a cell phone. We have a global cellular plan. So if you take your boat, which many people have, they've taken it from Europe across to North America. Our plan doesn't have any roaming charges. There's no overage fees. We understand that we bear the risk in that case, but we've been very successful with that. And the service plan is essentially just for the cellular and just to provide that cloud infrastructure, which is ongoing. And it's $300 Canadian, which works out to about $210 US per year. And we also have 50% off right now. So Peter, if you do have a boat, it's half price. That's our special offer for you guys.
I don't see any other questions right now. Yeah.
Oh, I can just fill in. I was thinking about, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with you. You mentioned that you have an accelerometer and also a gyroscope, or
yeah, it's all one part.
So we just was thinking, well, that you might be able to use this data for also feeding into a machine learning algorithm in the cloud. So if there is a storm, or, well, you could probably see a difference in patterns, I guess, if someone is walking on your boat, if this boat is rocking by a storm or of any kind. Have you played around with that, or is there anything?
Yeah, so we've actually been working on some contracts here to support the Royal Canadian Navy, and that's really focused on machine learning, artificial intelligence. And so since we've been in business now for 3 years, we've got a lot of data. We've also had incidences where a boat almost sank. So we've got quite a bit of data that actually involves incidences on a boat. So for machine learning, being able to identify good data and data when the vessel is at risk allows you to train a machine learning model. So we're going to be using a lot of that to help the military, first off, identify issues on board a boat and give predictive and preventative maintenance advice, saying like, hey, your bilge pump is running this frequently, or it's been, say, for example, if there's a current meter on your Nemea bus, it's your bilge pump's been running at a higher current recently, meaning that it's at its end of life. So machine learning, artificial intelligence is a very, very important and growing industry within IoT. If you are developing a new product right now, make sure that you structure your infrastructure to support artificial intelligence, machine learning. With the gyroscope, there's so many different things that you can do. I mean, with knowing how the weather has behaved on your boat at that location during a storm, you can tell someone in advance, like, hey, that same storm's coming by in 2 weeks. You might want to secure your boat. With the accelerometer, we monitor if the boat's jarring against the dock during a storm. So it really gives you an idea of, hey, this is how your boat behaved now. This is how it can be affected in the future. So it really is almost like a time machine when you use machine learning, artificial intelligence. It takes all your previous data, but then allows you to predict what's going to happen in the time to come.
Yeah, one of the other areas we looked at for machine learning, we haven't had a chance to implement it yet, but we have a camera on board. It's a still camera. So we take a lot of snapshots at a periodic schedule, and a lot of those snapshots are empty. So we looked at the feasibility of feeding that into some of the image recognition software that Google has, just in order to not identify an individual, but to just see if there is a person in that photo, so that we can highlight and surface the photos that have people in them and bring those photos to the attention of the boat owner. So instead of looking through a lot of photos that aren't really relevant, they can find the ones that make the most sense, right? Was somebody on board my boat? Okay, yeah, they're not supposed to be there, or it's my dad. So machine learning, you're not necessarily just developing your own machine learning models, but also leveraging the ones that have been built for you by a lot of by Google and Amazon, et cetera, can get you, a long way there. The other aspect of machine learning is the bandwidth aspect. So some machine learning may need to be done locally, just because the volume of the data is too great to send over cellular. The cellular cost, unfortunately, the cellular cost for IoT devices right now, or just cost in general for data transmission, is still quite high when you compare, what we as individuals get for a cell phone plan. Megabytes costs you more than what we get in gigabytes for our phones. So you have to be very mindful of how often you're sending the data, what data you're sending, what protocol you're using, because it can add up. You can get very, very large bills by designing your data transmission poorly. So you have to think about where are you going to do that machine learning You probably are going to do the model training in the cloud, and then you could run the algorithm if it has enough horsepower on the local device. So, you know, if you machine learning is not just sending all the data to the cloud and getting the cloud to do it.
Yeah, so you have a lot of work still to explore in that area. And one question which I thought about when we're talking about, you have the area of very small boats. I mean, I'm talking very small boats, canoes or rowing boats, like for asset tracking. Is that an area you have explored?
Yeah. So our product is more geared towards the 18 to like our ideal customer is a 55 to 65 foot power boat is what we've learned. And that's someone that has enough money where they see our product at $1,200 Canadian or at $899 US. They just look at it, it's like, oh, that's a quarter tank of gas. So like they just buy it right on the spot. Yeah. But our product's been installed on boats between 18 feet and 200 feet now. The smaller boats, eventually we will be looking at smaller asset trackers. We don't want to unveil our entire product roadmap, of course, but there's certainly some very obvious categories. There's the very small boats, there's the medium-sized boats, which is a very large market, and then there's the super yacht market. So there's three very distinct, and then within there, from the question about engineering and business and all that, there's a lot of micro segments within there. So there's fishing boats, there's sailboats, there's industrial boats, there's power boats, there's center console boats. There's all kinds of boats, and one 18-foot boat may be worth $10,000, and then another 18-foot boat may be worth $250,000. So within all those different boat sizes and designs, there's so many variations. So we decide to make a product that fits that largest market in the middle. And then there's obviously room to move smaller or larger as well.
Yeah. Also about insurance. I mean, when you have security on your boat, I guess that you could discuss your insurance, the price of your insurance with your insurance company, or do you,
Yeah. Well, Frederick, what if I told you that you could save 7 to 12% on your insurance premiums by having Barnacle on board?
Yeah. Okay. I'm doing the selling for you now. That's.
You guys.
Yeah. Okay.
No doubt. Thank you, Frederick. I really appreciate it.
Such a lead-in.
Yeah. We actually had one boat that we installed on a couple of weeks ago where their insurance discount paid for the Barnacle within 1 year. So that was pretty nice. It also means that our product's too inexpensive for that style of boat.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
The insurance market is changing. So having products like the Barnacle on board is definitely an asset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, just to skip back a little bit, you talked about the Mango Red board as a development board. This was 3-4 years ago, if I remember your slides correctly. Mm-hmm. So in IoT time, it's a vast amount of time. In real time, it's not very long. No. But if you were to start the project today, would you still recommend the Mango Red board, or do you have any preference for programming language or to get?
I mean that's good. So it comes back to what kind of device are you going to be building, and what kind of radio technology do you want to use? So I think a really good place to start is like Brandon did. If you're not using cellular, it's probably to look at Arduino or Raspberry Pi for prototyping. If you're looking at cellular and you're building and you want to build a low power, and when I say low power, I mean like microamps, very, very low current, hundreds of microamps, sub milliamps, then you probably want to look at NB-IoT based chips or LTE-M. And then you need to select your module. So who are you going to use for that chip? So then once you have that module selected, then they're already, the vendors, a lot of vendors produce their own dev kits in order to get you into their ecosystem, right? In an inexpensive way possible. So a couple of companies come to mind. There's Nordic Semiconductor, which has their own cellular module. Sierra Wireless obviously has a new version of the Mango platform. They call it Yellow, the Mango Yellow. It came out around this time last year, I believe. It's probably half the size of this Mango Red board, and it has even more functionality on it. I know a lot of people use the Espressive, right? ESP32s as a prototyping platform. So yeah, you can almost, if you use Raspberry Pi or Arduino, you can almost find a hat that will do any of those things and allow you to kind of start out. It's really when you need to drive the power consumption down that those platforms start being kind of a challenge, because they don't have they were never designed to be a low power platform. A lot of them have debugging components on them that are always powered. So yeah, but I think it's doing some research first. As for programming languages, most embedded development is still done in C, C++ in some cases, unless you're using something like a Raspberry Pi. When you have Linux, you have the choices of Python or Node or some of these other higher order languages. And then, again, we have to look at the cloud, right? Where are you going to send that data? So one of the cool aspects of a lot of the cloud vendors, I'd say all the big three, is they all provide some free tier for you to use. They do require that you give your credit card, but they won't charge you as long as you don't exceed any of their free tiers. Now, some of the services are free only for the first year. Others are free always. And in our case, for our Google Cloud, we actually don't consume some of the services to the level that we actually have to pay for them. And that's just by using that serverless aspect. So it's quite economical for us to run our cloud infrastructure this way. And the fact that it doesn't keep Brandon or I up at night worrying about if we're running the right version of Linux and have all the proper security patches installed. So that's Google's problem. We don't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah, and if you're just getting started, so I'm not a professional coder. Darren is expert level, like savant level. And so when I was starting out, I used Node.js as the programming language because there's pre-built libraries. So NPM, you could download NPM libraries for I think it was called a DHS 100, like a very rudimentary temperature humidity sensor. You can just download the Node.js library, and then you learn how to use APIs. You learn how to use software development kits, SDKs.
And
so
yes, that sensor is used in our course as well. I think most of my students have it in this. So
I mean, for me, Python, Node.js, just using really simple basic languages to get going. And then once you get into actually worrying about power consumption, you're worrying about all the low level, like kernel level stuff, even on Linux. That's when, that's when you jump into C, and that's when you get someone like Darren here on board, who's an expert in low power, high efficiency type stuff.
Yeah, and just to add to the discussion is that we're using MicroPython in this course, which is, you still program on an embedded device, but you get like a high level language and pretty easy to start.
So that's key.
I use MicroPython.
Nice to hear. Yeah, nice to hear your perspective on these things. I think we need to wrap it up now. We're already like a bit over time. So, and there seems to be, probably people are sleeping now. It's late in Sweden, so.
Hopefully that wasn't our fault.
Well, yeah, I do have that effect on people.
No. But I would like to give a big thank you for being a part of on sharing your experiences in this course. It's very, very valuable. If anyone wants
to continue following our journey, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. So just search the BRNKL on the search bar and you'll find us. But yeah, we're going to keep evolving. We're going to keep growing. If there are people that now that remote work's becoming more prevalent, if people are looking for work, we are always looking for good talent. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Canada. So
feel free to reach out too on LinkedIn if you have more questions. I always I love talking about this stuff. So.
Okay, great. You have some thank yous in the chat field as well. Well, I'll end the live stream now. And thank you everyone that has been listening in to the live stream. Thank you very much. And
and thank you for hosting. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Make sure everyone you go like the video. I think it's right about there,
and hit the subscribe button.
Button.